When my mother-in-law asked me to convert the window seat in her guest room to some cedar-lined storage, I thought it'd be a simple, straightforward project.
I made it in. It's just my knees.
Yeah, they're sticking up a little bit.
Clearly I was wrong.
Do you need a hand?
To be fair, there's a good reason why Ryan climbed into that half-finished storage box. And I can also explain why we had to turn these perfectly good pieces of plywood into piles of splinters and wood dust just to make some working lids. You know what? We'll get to that. Let's start at the beginning. With a completely absurd amount of optimism, I grabbed my saw and headed over to the in-laws' house. Yep, believe it or not, my wife's parents live right next door. It's actually super convenient because
Whoa, Dan. You're not really going to cut right into that, are you?
No, of course not. That'd be ridiculous.
Okay, good. Because of all the projects, you've really got to get this one
I
right.
started by measuring out 2 lids. It's such a huge window seat that one massive lid for the whole thing would have been kind of inconvenient to use. Next, I put down some tape to hopefully keep everything from chipping when I make my cuts. And yeah, those gaps helped me see where my lines were. I probably should have put down the tape first and then drew my lines, but oh well, this worked too. After picking up a new Diablo saw blade for this project, I adjusted the depth so that it would just barely cut through the top of the window seat. Then, I clamped down a yardstick as a guide and made my first cut. Look at that. I'm not sure if it's the tape or the saw blade, but it worked perfectly. No chipping whatsoever. Let's do a few more of those. Alright, now that I've cut all the way through the window seat...
So it looks like there's another sheet of OSB underneath that first board. So I'm going to have to do all those cuts again, which sucks.
I'll spare you the process of watching me reset the depth of the saw blade and then make all those cuts a second time. But once that was done, I just slid a regular saw through and finished cutting each corner where the circular saw couldn't reach. After using a box cutter to slice through the caulk on the underside of the lid, I was finally able to pop up the MDF and reveal the OSB blood. And once I removed a few nails holding the OSB in place, the 2 pieces came out pretty easily. Man, that's going to be a ton of storage. To make sure that the window seat would still be well supported, and to divide this huge space into 2 parts, I added a 1x8 piece of pine and some 2x4s under that middle section. The 1x8 sticks out just a little bit so that the lids can rest on it and be supported. I also glued and nailed some 1x4 side supports on both ends, which will also help support the lids. And then to finish up the interior, I just used thin tongue and groove cedar boards to line the space. I actually got super lucky with these boards because 5 of them side by side covered the bottom perfectly. I didn't have to rip any of them lengthwise. I did have to make a bunch of trim cuts while I lined the sides of the boxes just to make sure that each board ended on a 2x4 and also to make sure that all the boards were nicely staggered. This took a decent amount of measuring, planning, and cutting throughout the process, except for the 4 ends of the boxes where I could cut 4 pieces, all the same length, and just stack them up. And because I had plenty of cedar to use, I even trimmed out the 2x4s at the top of the storage box. And
No, you were nervous about the lids. You basically did everything you could to avoid working on them.
okay, look, lining these storage boxes with cedar was easy, but the lids were freaking me out. I knew they weren't strong enough on their own to support a lot of weight, but whatever I added to them had to be the perfect thickness so they'd end up flush with the rest of the seat. Not to mention the front, sides, and back also needed to line up perfectly, and it's not like I had any replacement lids to use if I screwed something up. So, because both the lids and I needed reinforcement, I asked Ryan to bring over some 7/16 plywood he had at his shop. We measured and cut the plywood to fit each lid, and then took them inside to test our work. I figured the best way to line up everything perfectly was to set the plywood in place, put the lid on top in the exact spot it came from when I cut it out, and then screw the plywood to the lid from underneath so the top wouldn't get messed up.
So the question is, how are you going to make sure it's right when we glue it together?
Well, I have an idea. I kind of need you to get in there and screw it.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
See, there's always a reason for the crazy stuff we do.
They're pretty big, so I might actually fit.
Be careful. Like I just made it.
Thanks.
Don't break anything.
I don't think so. I may be able to. These are seriously big.
Yeah.
Oh, but my knees.
Yeah, they're sticking up a little bit. The rest of you was good. All right, I'm going to give it a try.
Guys, I have a feeling this is going to be super ridiculous how easy this will be for Dan.
We'll see.
Hey.
Did I do it?
Your knee is below.
It's very tight. Let's try this right now before I lose my nerve.
Well, I'll just put one board on and then you can see. What do you think?
I mean, I think I might be able to do it.
Okay.
It was definitely tight, but I had just enough elbow room to use the screwdriver.
All right, I am going to press down on the top and go for the screwing.
All right, ready, set, go.
Oh boy.
Does that feel like it went in?
It sounded like it good, I don't know.
All right, second one.
Oh gosh.
Ryan was really concerned I was going to go too far and ruin the top of the lid, but it worked great.
I think we did it. It's totally on there perfectly, and all we had to do was crawl in here.
With the lid screwed to the plywood in the correct spot, we just traced the edges so I'd know where to glue the plywood later on. Then we did the second box too.
Guten Tag?
Yeah, I'm good.
After banishing Ryan back to his shop for totally disrespecting the workspace, I glued and clamped the plywood to the lid. While the glue dried, I picked up some Bondo to prep the sill area of the storage boxes for paint. I'd never used Bondo before, but apart from drying fairly quickly, it's not too much different than drywall mud or spackle. And it's a lot stronger and less likely to chip or flake if the lid slams down on it, which will probably happen at some point. I had to wait about 30 minutes to sand it, so while all of that cured, I went back to my garage and prepped the underside of the lids too. Then, after a quick sanding off camera, I put down a plastic drop cloth and painted both storage box sills and edges. I followed up by doing the same for the lids, sand and paint. And then, just as I feared, everything started going terribly wrong.
There's kind of a bow to it now that I added the plywood. So like if this is flat down here, that part's raised. And if that goes down, then this part's up. I think I have to like sand it down right here where it's bowed so it can like sit better on the ledges.
I feel like the problem with that is the front and back will be level, but I can like feel it bowed in the middle there.
Well, maybe we can try to bend it with some clamps and leave it overnight.
I don't think it's gonna bend.
Oh, it'll bend. It'll bend.
But it didn't bend, at least not permanently. I was able to clamp each corner and remove the bow from the lid, but the amount of stored energy pressing against the clamps let me know that it wasn't just going to straighten out. So I set the entire contraption out in the backyard to soak up the sun. I figured I'd leave it for 24 hours, let it heat up all afternoon and cool down all night, and just see if that made any difference. But the next day when I removed the clamps, there was still a lot of energy stored in the lids. I don't know, maybe they were bowed slightly less, but any amount at all would be obvious in the finished window seat. So I grabbed both lids and took them over to Ryan's shop for a more effective fix. Since the warped pieces of plywood were the problem, we decided to cut 2 long grooves in them all the way down to the MDF. Now the lids could be straightened right at those joints. The next step was to make sure they'd stay straight.
Yeah, so the grooves, we're gonna stick a piece of plywood down in there. We're gonna bend the whole lid, and then we're gonna glue it again, and that should stop the bowing problem that we're experiencing. It might also stop it from going the long direction too, just because the whole thing's gonna be flat when we glue it, and it's gonna basically have 2 spines of glued plywood running through it. So that's my fix, hopefully.
Amazingly, the lids were almost perfect even without any clamping. So we just cut 4 strips of plywood to go back in the grooves, and I took the lids home to finish up the fix, gluing and clamping them into place.
I really hope this works. It's about as far from professional as you can get.
Once the glue had dried, I cut off the ends of the strips and got to work removing the excess plywood sticking up from the grooves. In my head, all 4 of them went as easily as this one. Man, how awesome was that? But then the next 3 were the exact opposite of easy. Honestly, that's what usually happens when you fix something the wrong way. Typically, your fix will keep becoming a bigger and bigger issue all the way through the project. It's a lesson I'm still learning, but trust me, it's often better to start over and do it right than keep throwing time and energy at a mistake. So yeah, that's not foreshadowing the rest of the episode or anything, right?
Moment of truth.
Hey,
I mean, it's straighter. Because look, there's no bow like you were looking at before. This corner, though, gets so high. I wonder if...
Finish your thought.
I wonder if this supporting ledge is just higher than this. It's sitting on there. Okay. So we need to belt sand down this side a little bit. We'll need to belt sand down both sides. I think we just go around the whole thing.
And that's how we ended up back in Ryan's shop using a Ryobi belt sander and a chisel to remove 1/8 of an inch of plywood from the bottom of these lids. Guys, this is not our finest work.
this is like not awesome.
Let's move on. From here, it can only get better.
This is it. Last day of sanding. We're going to get these lids done for sure right now.
With the lid sorted out, I can put the final touches on these storage compartments. Just like in my headboard project, I picked up some iron-on edge banding for a super finished look. I got the banding in white to match the window seats, but you can also get wood veneer banding and stain it to match whatever kind of project you're working on. All it takes is a hot iron and some careful trimming at the end. And maybe a little sanding too, just to make the corners smooth. I put the exact same banding on all 4 sides of the lids, and then Ryan dropped by to help out with the last few details. These piano hinges came in 4-foot lengths, and we needed them to be around 44 inches instead. So we trimmed off the ends and then lined up the hinges, pre-drilled some holes, and then attached them to the lids with around 50 screws. Guys, I'm so excited to be at this stage of the project. The hinges are the last thing, and then we're done. Oh, and pre-drilling is a must, by the way. If you're screwing into MDF or plywood, you definitely don't want to split the wood. If you're curious, our costs were pretty low for this project, around $250 total. The cedar cost $35 for each box containing 15 square feet, and I ended up using 4 boxes of it. The piano hinges were $12 each. And the wood that I added for extra support was crazy expensive, but I don't think it was more than $80. There were a few other items I picked up here and there too.
All right, let's do the other one.
All right.
The tougher one.
If you've got a smaller window seat, you won't need all the materials that we did, and you could also use drywall or anything else you like to cover the interior of the boxes and save a little money.
A little tighter than the other one, but not bad at all.
I gotta say, those cedar boards look amazing next to all that white trim. It just looks cozy. Plus, it'll keep blankets and pillows and whatever else is in here smelling nice, and safe from moths and other critters. Now, I know some of you are probably thinking, Dan, if you'd have just hired someone who knows what they're doing, you could have saved yourself a ton of time and effort. Half of the video was you trying to fix your mistakes, and the other half was either you or Ryan in a wooden box. Well, I can't argue with you. This project kind of turned into a mess. But you know what? It was my mess. And I learned a lot by dealing with it and figuring out how to clean it up. That's really what made it worth it. Plus, maybe somebody else learned something from watching me fail. If so, that's awesome too.
What do you think, dude?
Man, I think these turned out awesome. You can fit like at least 50 babies in there. Blankets. I said 50 blankets. What did you hear?